The morning mist hung low over the small town of Cedar Ridge, Tennessee, wrapping the autumn landscape in a gossamer shroud that made everything appear dreamlike and ethereal. Marcus Thompson sat on the weathered wooden porch of his grandfather's old farmhouse, a cup of black coffee growing cold between his calloused hands as he watched the sun struggle to break through the gray veil. At 42 years old, with 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq etched into the lines of his face, Marcus had seen enough sunrises to last several lifetimes. But there was something about the ones here, in this quiet corner of the world where his childhood memories still whispered from every corner, that made him feel something close to peace. It had been 18 months since he'd returned stateside for the last time, medically discharged after a roadside bomb had taken his left leg below the knee and left him with a ringing in his ears that never quite faded. The prosthetic was good, state-of-the-art, they'd told him, and most days he could almost forget it wasn't flesh and bone. Almost. The nightmares were harder to forget, the ones that jolted him awake at 3 in the morning, his heart pounding and sweat soaking through his sheets as phantom explosions echoed in the darkness of his bedroom. His wife, Sarah, had tried to understand. She'd been patient for the first year, attending the therapy sessions with him, learning about PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, holding him when the darkness threatened to swallow him whole. But patience has its limits, even for love, and 6 months ago she'd packed her bags with tears streaming down her face and told him she couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore. The divorce papers had arrived 3 weeks later. He'd signed them without reading them, without feeling anything at all. That numbness had become his constant companion now. It wrapped around him like a familiar blanket, protecting him from the sharp edges of grief and loss that would otherwise cut him to ribbons. His therapist at the VA called it disassociation, said it was his mind's way of protecting itself from trauma it couldn't process. Marcus called it survival. He'd come to Cedar Ridge to escape, to hide from the well-meaning friends who kept inviting him to barbecues and birthday parties, from the looks of pity in the eyes of strangers who noticed his limp, from the relentless demands of a world that expected him to simply get better and move on. His grandfather had left him this house when he'd passed away 5 years ago, and Marcus had always meant to fix it up, maybe retire here someday. Now, at 42, he supposed this was as close to retirement as he was going to get. The coffee had gone completely cold by the time he noticed the dog. It appeared at the edge of the property line, where the overgrown grass gave way to the thick forest that stretched for miles in every direction. At first, Marcus thought it might be a coyote or perhaps a deer moving through the morning mist. But as the shape drew closer, he could see it was definitely a dog, medium-sized, with a coat that might have been golden once, but was now matted and dull with dirt and neglect. The dog stopped about 50 yards from the porch, its head tilted slightly, as if studying him with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. There was something in those eyes, even from this distance, something that spoke of intelligence and purpose that went beyond the usual canine curiosity. Marcus set his coffee cup down on the railing and stood slowly, his prosthetic leg creaking slightly in the morning chill. "Hey there," he called out, his voice rough from disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to another living creature. "You lost, buddy?" The dog didn't move, didn't wag its tail or lower its head in submission. It simply stood there, watching him with those strange, knowing eyes. Then, without warning, it turned and began walking back toward the tree line. Marcus would later wonder what made him follow. Maybe it was the way the dog had looked at him, like it knew something he didn't. Maybe it was the crushing boredom of another empty day stretching before him with nothing to fill it but memories and regrets. Or maybe it was something deeper, something instinctual that recognized a fellow wounded soul and felt compelled to reach out. Whatever the reason, Marcus found himself walking down the porch steps and across the dew-soaked grass, following the golden shape into the forest. The dog stayed about 30 yards ahead of him, moving with a purposeful gait that suggested it knew exactly where it was going. Every few minutes, it would stop and turn its head, checking to make sure Marcus was still following before continuing on its way. The forest closed in around them, the morning mist growing thicker as the canopy above blocked out what little sunlight had managed to break through the clouds. Marcus's prosthetic made the uneven terrain challenging, and more than once he had to steady himself against a tree trunk as his foot caught on a hidden root or rock. The ringing in his ears seemed louder in the silence of the forest, a constant reminder of everything he'd lost. But he kept going, driven by a curiosity that felt almost foreign after months of feeling nothing at all. They walked for nearly an hour before the dog finally stopped. They had reached a clearing of sorts, though calling it that seemed generous. It was more of a natural depression in the landscape, where the ground sloped downward toward what appeared to be the remains of an old mining operation. Marcus could see the rusted skeleton of what might have been an ore cart, along with scattered pieces of equipment that had been slowly consumed by the forest over the decades. The dog was standing at the edge of a dark opening in the hillside, a shaft that descended at a steep angle into the earth. It turned to look at Marcus, then back at the hole, then at Marcus again. "You've got to be kidding me," Marcus muttered, approaching cautiously. The old mine shaft was partially collapsed, its wooden supports rotted and broken. Warning signs, faded almost to illegibility, were posted on rusted poles around the perimeter. Danger, no trespassing, unstable ground. The dog whined, a sound that was almost plaintive, and took a few steps toward the opening. "Hey, no," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "That's not safe. Come here, come on." But the dog didn't come. Instead, it turned and began picking its way down the steep slope of the shaft, disappearing into the darkness within seconds. Marcus stood at the edge, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't for months. Every rational thought screamed at him to turn around, to go back to the farmhouse and forget about the stray dog that had led him on this bizarre journey. The shaft was clearly unstable. One wrong step could bring the whole thing down on his head. And for what? A dog he didn't know, that probably just had a den down there and wanted to be left alone? But there was that whine again, echoing up from the darkness, and this time there was something else. A sound that made Marcus's blood run cold. Crying. Human crying. Without another thought, Marcus pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The battery was at 40%, which would have to be enough. He tested the edge of the shaft with his prosthetic foot, feeling for stability, then began his descent. The slope was steeper than it had appeared from above, and within minutes, Marcus was half sliding, half climbing down a surface of loose dirt and crumbling rock. His prosthetic slipped twice, sending showers of debris cascading into the darkness below. But he managed to catch himself on the ancient wooden supports that lined the walls. They creaked ominously under his grip, and he tried not to think about how long they'd been there, or how much weight they could still bear. The air grew colder and damper as he descended, carrying with it the musty smell of earth and decay. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness like a knife, revealing glimpses of the shaft's original construction, rough-hewn timber and rusted iron bolts, before swallowing them again in shadow. The crying was getting louder. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 10 minutes, Marcus reached the bottom of the shaft. He found himself in a small chamber, maybe 15 feet across, where the mining operation had apparently hit a dead end. The walls were bare rock here, slick with moisture, and covered in patches of phosphorescent moss that gave off an eerie green glow. The dog was there, sitting beside what Marcus first took to be a pile of rags, but quickly realized was a person. A small person, a child. Marcus's combat training kicked in before his conscious mind could process what he was seeing. He moved forward quickly but carefully, assessing the situation as he went. The child was a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with tangled brown hair and a face streaked with dirt and tears. She was conscious but clearly injured, her left leg twisted at an angle that made Marcus wince. Beside her, pressed close against her side, was another dog, smaller than the golden one that had led him here. This one was black and white, what looked like a border collie mix, and it was immediately apparent that something was terribly wrong with it. The dog wasn't moving. Its eyes were closed, its breathing shallow and labored. Even in the dim light, Marcus could see the matted blood on its side, the way its fur was torn and ragged. Hey, it's okay, Marcus said, dropping to his knees beside the girl. My name is Marcus. I'm going to help you. Can you tell me your name? The girl looked up at him with eyes that were too old for her face, eyes that had seen too much in their short time on this earth. Lily, she whispered. My name is Lily. Please, you have to help Scout. She fell trying to protect me. She fell and she won't wake up. Marcus looked at the injured dog, then back at the girl. He'd been trained to triage, to assess the severity of injuries and prioritize accordingly. The girl's leg was broken, that much was clear, but it wasn't a compound fracture and she wasn't bleeding out. She was in pain and scared, but she wasn't in immediate danger of dying. The dog, on the other hand, was clearly in critical condition. And from the way Lily was looking at it, from the way her small hand was buried in its fur even as she spoke, Marcus knew that losing Scout might be a wound from which this child would never recover. I'm going to help both of you, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos of emotions churning in his chest. But I need you to tell me what happened. How long have you been down here? The story came out in fragments, broken by sobs and punctuated by the girl's constant worried glances at the unmoving dog. Lily and her mother had been traveling through the area, she explained, running from someone. Lily didn't say who, but Marcus could fill in the blanks. Domestic abuse had a particular signature, a combination of fear and exhaustion that he recognized all too well from the refugees he'd encountered overseas. They had been camping in the woods, trying to stay off the grid, when Lily had wandered too far while gathering firewood. She'd found the old mine shaft and, being curious as children are, had decided to explore. The first dog, the golden one that had led Marcus here, had been living in the forest. Lily had been feeding it scraps from their meager supplies for the past week, earning its trust through patience and kindness. When she'd started down the shaft, the golden dog had followed. But then the ground had given way beneath her feet, sending Lily tumbling down the steep slope. Her leg had twisted beneath her as she fell, and she'd landed hard at the bottom of the shaft, unable to move. The golden dog had stayed with her at first, but as the hours passed and Lily grew weaker, it had disappeared up the shaft, leaving her alone in the darkness. That had been 2 days ago. Scout found me, Lily continued, her voice barely above a whisper now. She came down the shaft like it was nothing. She's been keeping me warm, sharing her body heat. But then, last night, there was a noise, something up above. I think maybe a bear. Scout went up to check, and there was this awful sound, this growling and barking. And then, the tears came fresh now, streaming down her dirty face. Then she came back down, all bloody and hurt, and she hasn't woken up since. Marcus felt his throat tighten. This child, lost and injured in a hole in the ground, had been protected first by a stray she'd befriended with kindness, and then by a dog she'd never even met before. There was something profound in that, something that spoke to the mysterious bonds that could form between species, the capacity for love and sacrifice that transcended the boundaries of language and understanding. Your other dog, he said, gesturing toward the entrance of the shaft where the golden one had appeared. What's her name? Lily shook her head. She doesn't have one. I just called her Gold. I wanted to give her a real name, but I thought maybe I should wait until she trusted me more. Marcus nodded, his mind racing through the logistics of the rescue. He had no way to call for help from down here, his phone signal completely blocked by the tons of rock and earth above them. He couldn't carry both the girl and the injured dog up the steep shaft, not with his prosthetic leg already aching from the descent. And he couldn't leave either of them behind. Okay, he said, more to himself than to Lily. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I need you to be very brave for me. Can you do that? Lily nodded, her small hand still clutching Scout's fur. I'm going to stabilize your leg as best I can, and then I'm going to carry you up to the surface. Once we're up there, I'll call for help and we'll get Scout out too, I promise. But what if she dies while we're gone? What if she wakes up alone and scared? Marcus looked at the dog, at the shallow rise and fall of her chest, at the blood that continued to seep slowly from the wound on her side. He wasn't a veterinarian, but he'd seen enough combat injuries to know that Scout was running out of time. Every minute they delayed was a minute less that the dog had to live. But the girl couldn't climb out on her own, and he couldn't carry both of them at once. It was an impossible choice, the kind that had haunted his dreams since Afghanistan, the kind that had no right answer, only varying degrees of tragedy. That's when Gold reappeared. The golden dog had been waiting at the entrance to the chamber, watching the scene unfold with those strange, knowing eyes. Now she moved forward, padding silently across the rocky floor until she stood beside Marcus. She looked at him, then at Scout, then back at him. And then she lay down beside the injured dog, pressing her body against Scout's in a way that was unmistakably protective. "She'll stay," Marcus heard himself say. "She'll keep Scout warm until we come back. Dogs know things, Lily. They understand more than we give them credit for. Scout won't be alone." Lily looked at Gold, at the way the stray had positioned herself as a living blanket for the injured border collie. Something passed between the child and the golden dog, some unspoken communication that Marcus couldn't interpret but could feel in the air like static electricity. "Okay," Lily said finally. "Okay, I trust you. I trust Gold." Marcus worked quickly to splint Lily's leg, using strips torn from his jacket and 2 straight branches he found in the debris at the bottom of the shaft. The girl cried out when he set the bone, but she didn't scream, didn't lose consciousness. She was tougher than she looked, this little one. Tougher than she should have to be. The climb out of the shaft was the hardest thing Marcus had done since leaving the military. Lily clung to his back, her arms wrapped around his neck, her broken leg jostling with every step, no matter how careful he tried to be. His prosthetic slipped and caught, and more than once he felt certain that they were going to fall, tumbling back down into the darkness to join the dogs in their underground tomb. But they didn't fall. Inch by agonizing inch, they made their way up the steep slope, past the crumbling wooden supports and the shower of loose dirt, until finally, Marcus felt fresh air on his face and saw the gray light of an overcast sky above them. He crawled the last few feet on his hands and knees, pulling Lily out of the shaft and onto solid ground before collapsing beside her, his chest heaving and his prosthetic leg screaming in protest. "You did it," Lily whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "You really did it." Marcus nodded, unable to speak for a long moment as he struggled to catch his breath. His phone showed 2 bars of signal now, enough to make a call. He dialed 911 with shaking fingers and reported their location as best he could, describing the old mine shaft and the injured child and dog waiting to be rescued. The dispatcher promised that help was on the way. 20 minutes, maybe 30. For Scout, that might be too long. Marcus looked at the girl, at the fear and hope warring in her eyes, and made a decision. "I'm going back down," he said. "I'm going to bring Scout up." "But you can barely walk," Lily protested. "You'll hurt yourself." Marcus thought about all the times he'd pushed past his limits in combat, all the times he'd done impossible things because the alternative was watching his brothers and sisters in arms die. He thought about the numbness that had wrapped around his heart for the past 18 months, the feeling of being already dead, just waiting for his body to catch up with his soul. And he thought about Gold, the stray dog that had led him here, that had somehow known that a child needed help and had found the one person crazy enough to follow her into a hole in the ground. "I'll be okay," he said. "I promise." The second descent was easier than the first, partly because Marcus knew what to expect, and partly because he was no longer carrying anyone on his back. When he reached the chamber, Gold was exactly where he'd left her, pressed against Scout's side, her tail thumping weakly against the ground in greeting. "Good girl," Marcus murmured, running his hand over Gold's matted fur. "Good, brave girl." He turned his attention to Scout, assessing her injuries with the clinical detachment that had served him well in triage situations overseas. The wound on her side was deep but hadn't severed any major arteries. The blood loss was significant but not immediately fatal. If he could get her to a vet in the next hour, she had a chance. But getting her up the shaft was going to be a challenge. Scout was a medium-sized dog, probably 50 pounds or so, and she was completely unconscious, dead weight that would be difficult to carry up the steep slope. Marcus looked around the chamber, searching for anything he might use. His eyes fell on the remnants of an old canvas tarp, half buried in the debris. It was rotted in places, but still mostly intact. Using his pocket knife, he cut a section large enough to wrap around Scout, creating a makeshift sling that he could secure across his chest and back. "Okay, girl," he said, gently lifting the unconscious dog and arranging her in the sling. "This is going to be bumpy, but I need you to hang in there. There's a little girl up top who really needs you to make it." Gold followed him as he began the ascent, staying close behind as if ready to catch them if they fell. The extra weight made every step more precarious, and Marcus had to stop multiple times to rest, his muscles burning and his prosthetic leg threatening to give out entirely. But he kept going, driven by the memory of Lily's face, of the hope in her eyes when she'd told him about Scout protecting her. The rescue team arrived just as Marcus emerged from the shaft for the second time. They were a motley crew, a mix of county sheriff's deputies, volunteer firefighters, and EMTs from the nearest hospital, 20 miles away. Their faces registered shock when they saw Marcus, covered in dirt and blood, a dog strapped to his chest in a makeshift carrier, emerging from a hole in the ground like some kind of apparition. "We need a vet," Marcus gasped, sinking to his knees as the adrenaline finally began to fade. "The dog needs a vet, right now." One of the EMTs rushed forward to take Scout from him, handling her with a gentleness that made Marcus's throat tighten. Another EMT was already working on Lily, stabilizing her leg properly and preparing her for transport to the hospital. And through it all, Gold sat at the edge of the clearing, watching with those knowing eyes that seemed to take in everything. The next few hours were a blur of movement and noise. Marcus rode in the ambulance with Lily, holding her hand while she told him stories about her mother, about their life on the road, about the father they'd been running from. The sheriff's deputies listened and took notes, and Marcus could see the anger building in their eyes as the full picture of Lily's life emerged. Her mother was found that afternoon, still camped in the woods about a mile from the mine shaft. She had been searching for Lily for 2 days straight, barely eating or sleeping, driven by a desperation that only a parent can know. When the deputies brought her to the hospital, she collapsed at her daughter's bedside, sobbing with relief and apologizing over and over for letting her wander too far. Scout was transported to a veterinary hospital in the city, where a team of surgeons worked for 3 hours to repair the damage from her encounter with whatever predator had attacked her. The wounds were consistent with a large cat, the vet explained later, probably a mountain lion protecting its territory. Scout had fought back, probably saving Lily's life in the process, and had paid the price for her bravery. But she was going to live. Against all odds, the little border collie was going to pull through. Marcus spent that night in a chair beside Lily's hospital bed, too exhausted to move but too wired to sleep. Gold had followed the ambulance to the hospital, running behind it for miles until finally the driver had stopped and let her climb into the back. Now she was curled up at the foot of Lily's bed, granted special permission by a sympathetic nurse who claimed to have not noticed the dog at all. As the sun began to rise outside the hospital window, casting long shadows across the room, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The numbness that had been his constant companion for 18 months seemed to crack, just a little, letting in a sliver of something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Purpose. For the first time since that roadside bomb had changed his life forever, Marcus Thompson felt like there was a reason to get up in the morning. He had done something that mattered. He had saved a child and a dog, had climbed down into darkness and brought them both back to the light. And for all the therapy sessions and medications and well-meaning advice, This was the first thing that had made him feel alive in longer than he could remember. The investigation into Lily's father moved quickly. He was found 3 states away, already wanted for assault and battery charges that predated his marriage to Lily's mother. The restraining order was filed within the week, and the district attorney promised that he would be pursuing the maximum charges available under the law. Lily's mother, whose name was Emma, was overwhelmed with gratitude for Marcus. She visited him at his grandfather's farmhouse after she and Lily were discharged from the hospital, bringing a homemade pie that she admitted was the first thing she'd baked in over a year. They sat on the porch together, watching Gold and Scout play in the yard, their recovery almost complete now, and Emma told Marcus her story. She had met Lily's father when she was just 19, a small-town girl dazzled by his charm and confidence. The abuse had started slowly, so gradually that she didn't recognize it for what it was until it was too late. By the time she finally found the courage to leave, she had no money, no family nearby, and a daughter who depended on her for everything. "We've been running for almost 2 years," Emma said, her eyes distant. "Moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Lily's never had a real home, never had a chance to make friends or go to a regular school. Some days I wonder if I made the right choice, if running was really any better than staying." Marcus thought about his own running, about the way he'd fled to Cedar Ridge to escape from a world that felt too loud and too bright and too demanding. "Running isn't the same as living," he said quietly, "but sometimes you have to run before you can find a place where it's safe to stop." Emma looked at him with tears in her eyes. "How do you know when you found that place?" Marcus didn't have an answer for her then, but over the weeks that followed, as autumn deepened into early winter and the first snow fell on the hills around Cedar Ridge, something began to take shape, a possibility that Marcus had never allowed himself to consider. Emma and Lily needed somewhere to stay while they rebuilt their lives. Marcus had a farmhouse with 3 empty bedrooms and more space than any one person could ever use. The solution seemed obvious, but it took Gold and Scout to make it happen. The 2 dogs had become inseparable since the rescue. They slept together, ate together, played together with a bond that seemed to transcend their different backgrounds. Scout, fully recovered now, had appointed herself Gold's guardian and protector, leading her through the woods around the farmhouse and teaching her the skills that domesticated dogs take for granted. And Gold, in turn, had softened from the wary stray she'd been into something approaching a real pet, allowing herself to be petted and brushed and even brought inside when the nights got too cold. It was Lily who finally asked the question that everyone had been thinking. "Mr. Marcus," she said one afternoon, watching the dogs wrestle in the snow-covered yard, "do you think maybe we could stay here? Not forever, just for a while, until Mom finds a job and we can get our own place." Marcus looked at the child, at the hope in her eyes that was so different from the fear he'd seen that day in the mine shaft. He looked at Emma, who was standing in the doorway of the farmhouse with a cup of coffee in her hands, not meeting his gaze because she was too proud to ask for help, but too tired to refuse it if it was offered. And he looked at Gold, the stray who had led him to this moment, who had somehow known that a broken soldier and a frightened child were exactly what each other needed. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that maybe you could stay here for as long as you want. This old house has been too quiet for too long. It could use some life in it again." The winter that followed was unlike any Marcus had experienced before. The farmhouse, which had been a place of solitude and shadows, became filled with noise and light and warmth. Emma took over the kitchen, cooking meals that actually required more than one pot and filling the air with smells that reminded Marcus of holidays long past. Lily started attending the local elementary school, making friends with a speed that astonished her mother and delighted Marcus. And the dogs, all 4 of them now, since Gold had delivered a surprise litter of 3 puppies shortly after moving into the farmhouse, turned the property into their personal playground. Gold's puppies were clearly mixed breeds, their father's identity a mystery that she kept to herself. But they had their mother's golden fur and her strange, knowing eyes. and Marcus found himself spending hours each day just watching them tumble and play and discover the world. He started going to therapy again, this time at a VA clinic in the city about an hour away. His new therapist, a former Army medic who had seen combat herself, didn't try to fix him or tell him that everything was going to be okay. Instead, she listened as he talked about the mine shaft and the rescue, about the way helping Lily had made him feel useful for the first time in years, about the strange dog that had led him to exactly where he needed to be. "Animals have a way of knowing things," she said during one of their sessions. "Some people call it instinct, others call it something more. Whatever it is, it sounds like that dog recognized something in you that you couldn't see in yourself." Marcus thought about that a lot in the months that followed. He thought about it when he woke up from nightmares, still sweating and shaking, but now with Gold pressed against his side, her warm presence grounding him in the present. He thought about it when he watched Scout and Lily playing in the yard, the bond between them so strong that it was impossible to remember a time when they hadn't known each other. And he thought about it when he looked at Emma, at the way she had begun to smile again, at the light returning to eyes that had been dim with fear and exhaustion. Spring came to Cedar Ridge with a burst of color and warmth that seemed to mirror the changes happening inside the old farmhouse. The puppies, now nearly grown, had found homes with neighbors who had fallen in love with their gentle personalities and intelligent eyes. Only one remained, a female that Lily had named Hope, who refused to leave her mother's side and had been adopted as the official farmhouse mascot. Emma got a job at the local library, rediscovering a love of books that her years of running had nearly extinguished. Lily finished the school year with straight A's and a circle of friends who adored her. And Marcus, to his own surprise, found himself volunteering at a local animal shelter, using his experience to help rescue dogs adjust to domestic life. It was during one of those volunteer shifts that the news came. The local newspaper was doing a feature on the shelter's work, and the reporter had heard about Marcus's rescue of Lily and Scout. She wanted to interview him, to share the story with the community. Marcus's first instinct was to refuse. He had never liked publicity, never wanted recognition for the things he'd done. In the military, the soldiers who sought out medals and commendations were usually the ones you couldn't trust when things got hard. The real heroes, the ones who made a difference, did their work quietly and without fanfare. But Emma convinced him otherwise. "Your story could inspire other people," she said one evening, sitting beside him on the porch while the dogs played in the fading light. "Other veterans who are struggling, other people who feel lost and alone. If they know what you did, what you came back from, maybe it will give them hope." So Marcus agreed to the interview. He sat in the shelter's reception area with Gold at his feet and told the reporter everything, from the morning mist and the cold coffee to the moment he'd emerged from the mine shaft with Scout strapped to his chest. He talked about the nightmares and the numbness, about the divorce and the feeling of being already dead. And he talked about Gold, about the way she had appeared at the edge of his property like an answered prayer, and led him to exactly where he needed to be. The story ran on the front page of the local newspaper, accompanied by a photo of Marcus, Lily, Emma, and all 4 dogs posed in front of the farmhouse. Within days, it had been picked up by larger outlets, shared thousands of times on social media, and featured on morning news programs across the country. Letters began arriving at the farmhouse, first a trickle and then a flood. They came from veterans who had recognized their own struggles in Marcus's story, from abuse survivors who had found hope in Emma and Lily's journey, from dog lovers who had been moved to tears by Gold and Scout's bond. Each letter was different, but they all carried the same message: thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for showing us that it's possible to come back from the darkness. Marcus read each letter carefully, keeping them in a box beneath his bed. On the nights when the nightmares came and the ringing in his ears seemed loud enough to drown out everything else, he would take out the letters and read them again, reminding himself that his pain had a purpose, that his survival meant something. A year after the rescue, Marcus and Emma stood together in the kitchen of the farmhouse, washing dishes side by side while Lily did her homework at the table. Gold and Scout were curled up by the fireplace, their bodies intertwined, while Hope lay at Lily's feet, her head resting on her paws. "I never thanked you properly," Emma said, her hands still in the soapy water. "For everything you did, for saving Lily, for saving us." Marcus shook his head. "I should be thanking you. Before that day, I wasn't really living. I was just existing, waiting for the end. Gold led me to that mine shaft, but you and Lily are the ones who gave me a reason to climb back out." Emma turned to look at him, her eyes soft in the warm light of the kitchen. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "About what comes next. Lily loves it here. She loves the school, her friends, the dogs. And she hesitated, the words seeming to stick in her throat. "I love it here too. But we can't keep imposing on you forever. Eventually, we need to find our own place, build our own life." Marcus felt his heart constrict at the thought of them leaving. Over the past year, the farmhouse had become a home in a way it never had been before. The thought of it returning to empty rooms and silent hallways was almost more than he could bear. "What if this was your place?" he said, the words coming before he could think them through. "What if this was your life?" Emma's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this house is too big for one person. I'm saying that I've gotten used to Lily's laughter and your cooking and those damn dogs taking up more than their fair share of the couch. I'm saying that I don't want you to leave, not ever." For a long moment, Emma didn't speak. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, transforming her features in a way that took Marcus's breath away. "Are you asking us to stay?" "I'm asking you to stay," Marcus confirmed. "If you want to, if you think you could be happy here." Emma reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I think," she said softly, "that I've never been happier anywhere in my life." From her spot by the fireplace, Gold lifted her head and wagged her tail, as if she had understood every word. Scout stretched and yawned, then settled back against her companion's side. And Lily looked up from her homework, a knowing smile on her young face. "Does this mean we're staying forever?" she asked. Marcus looked at Emma, at the dogs, at the child who had become as dear to him as his own flesh and blood. "Forever," he said, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the word didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The years that followed brought changes that Marcus could never have anticipated. He and Emma were married in a simple ceremony in the farmhouse's backyard, with Lily as the flower girl and all 4 dogs serving as ring bearers. The local newspaper covered the wedding, calling it the happy ending to a story that had captured the community's heart. But it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Marcus's work at the animal shelter expanded into something more. Inspired by Gold's intuitive response to his PTSD, he began researching the connection between rescued animals and mental health. He discovered that there was a growing body of evidence supporting the use of shelter dogs as therapy animals, particularly for veterans suffering from trauma. With Emma's help and a grant from the VA, Marcus established a program that paired veterans with rescue dogs. The dogs received training in homes, the veterans received companions who understood their pain without judging it. The program was called Gold's Gift, in honor of the stray who had started it all. Within 3 years, Gold's Gift had expanded to 5 states, helping hundreds of veterans find the healing that traditional therapy alone couldn't provide. Marcus traveled to conferences and seminars, telling his story over and over, watching as hardened soldiers wept at the reminder that there was still beauty and kindness in the world. Gold herself became something of a celebrity. Her photo hung in the entrance of every Gold's Gift Center, and her story was told to every veteran who came through the program. She grew old gracefully, her golden fur turning silver around the muzzle, her pace slowing but her spirit remaining unchanged. She still followed Marcus everywhere, still pressed against his side during nightmares, still watched the world with those strange, knowing eyes that had first caught his attention on that misty morning so long ago. Scout lived to the remarkable age of 14, passing peacefully in her sleep with Lily's hand on her head. The girl, no longer a child but a young woman preparing for college, grieved with a depth that only comes from losing a first true friend. But she found comfort in Hope, Gold's daughter, who had grown into a mirror image of her mother and had appointed herself as Lily's guardian the moment Scout's eyes closed for the last time. When the time came for Lily to leave for college, choosing a pre-veterinary program at the state university, she took Hope with her. It was the first time the old farmhouse had been without at least 2 dogs since the rescue, and the silence was initially unbearable. But Gold filled the space with her presence, reminding Marcus and Emma that they were never truly alone. Gold passed on a quiet autumn morning, 15 years after she had first appeared at the edge of Marcus's property. She was lying on her favorite spot on the porch, the sun warming her silver fur, when she simply closed her eyes and didn't open them again. Marcus found her there when he came out with his morning coffee, and he knew immediately that she was gone. He sat beside her for a long time, his hand on her side, his tears falling freely onto her fur. He remembered the morning mist and the cold coffee, the descent into darkness and the climb back into light. He remembered the way she had looked at him, like she knew something he didn't, like she could see through all his defenses to the broken man underneath and loved him anyway. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for finding me, for leading me out." Emma found him there an hour later, still sitting beside Gold's body, his cheeks wet with tears but a peaceful expression on his face. She sat down beside him without saying a word, her hand finding his and holding it tight. "She knew," Marcus said finally. "Somehow, she always knew." "Knew what?" "What I needed. What we all needed. That day in the forest, she led me to Lily and Scout. But she also led me to you, to this life, to everything that matters." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. Maybe that's what love is, knowing what someone needs before they know themselves. They buried Gold beneath the old oak tree in the backyard, the same spot where the wedding ceremony had taken place. Lily came home from college for the service, bringing Hope with her, and the 3 of them stood together in the fading autumn light, saying goodbye to the dog that had changed all of their lives. The headstone Marcus commissioned was simple, just Gold's name and 2 dates, but beneath them were carved the words that seemed to capture everything she had been. She led the lost home. In the years that followed, Gold's Gift continued to grow, eventually becoming a nationwide organization with chapters in every state. Marcus served as its founder and spokesperson until he was well into his 70s, telling his story to anyone who would listen, watching as hundreds of veterans found their own golds, their own paths out of darkness. Emma published a book about their journey, a memoir that spent weeks on the bestseller lists and was eventually adapted into a movie that made audiences around the world weep. She donated all the proceeds to Gold's Gift, saying that the only payment she needed was the knowledge that their story was helping others. Lily became a veterinarian, specializing in the care of rescued animals. She established a clinic next to the original Gold's Gift Center, providing free medical care to all the dogs in the program. When she married, it was in the same backyard where her mother had wed Marcus, with Hope serving as the last connection to the dog that had started it all. Hope lived to be 16, the last of Gold's line. When she passed, Lily grieved as deeply as she had for Scout, but this time the grief was mixed with gratitude for all the years of love and companionship. Marcus himself lived to be 93 years old, long enough to see Gold's Gift become a permanent institution, long enough to hold his step-grandchildren in his arms, long enough to make peace with all the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. The nightmares never completely went away, but they faded with time, becoming whispers instead of screams. On the night before he passed, surrounded by family in the same farmhouse where so much had happened, Marcus dreamed one last time. But this dream was different from the others. In this dream, he was standing at the edge of his property, watching the morning mist roll across the grass. And there, appearing out of the gray light like a miracle, was Gold. Not the old Gold, silver-muzzled and slow, but the young Gold, golden and bright and full of life. She looked at him with those knowing eyes and wagged her tail, then turned and began walking toward the tree line. This time, Marcus didn't hesitate. He followed her into the mist, into the light, leaving behind a legacy of love and healing that would touch countless lives for generations to come. When they found him the next morning, there was a smile on his face, and Emma, holding his hand for the last time, knew exactly where he had gone. The funeral was held on a crisp autumn morning, the same kind of morning that had started everything so many years ago. Veterans came from across the country, along with the families of countless dogs and humans who had been brought together through Gold's gift. They told stories of Marcus and Gold, of impossible rescues and unexpected redemption, of the power of love to transform even the most broken among us. At the end of the service, as the autumn sun broke through the clouds and bathed the farmhouse in golden light, someone released a single golden retriever into the yard. She was a descendant of one of the dogs from the program, trained in the same methods that Marcus had developed, ready to bring healing to a veteran who had lost all hope. The dog ran across the grass, her golden fur gleaming in the sunlight, and for just a moment, everyone who was watching could swear they saw something else, a shadow that ran alongside her, a ghost with knowing eyes and a wagging tail, leading the way toward healing. And in that moment, everyone understood what Marcus had known all along, that love doesn't end with death, that the bonds we form with those who save us transcend time and space and mortality, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply leading someone lost out of the darkness and into the light. The story of Marcus Thompson and the stray dog that saved him became a legend in Cedar Ridge, told and retold through generations until the line between fact and folklore blurred. But for those who had been there, who had seen Gold appear out of the mist and lead a broken soldier to a hole in the ground, the truth was always clear. Some things in this world can't be explained by science or logic. Some connections are too profound for human understanding. And sometimes, a stray dog wandering through the forest isn't really a stray at all. Sometimes, she's exactly where she's meant to be. At the entrance to every Gold's Gift Center, there hangs a plaque with a simple message that captures everything the organization stands for. The words were chosen by Marcus himself, shortly after Gold's passing, as a tribute to the dog who had changed his life. They read, "In our darkest moments, when all hope seems lost and the darkness threatens to consume us, sometimes salvation comes in an unexpected form. It comes with 4 legs and a wagging tail. It comes with eyes that see beyond our defenses to the wounded souls beneath. It comes with a love that asks nothing and gives everything. Today, you may feel like the most lost person in the world, but somewhere out there, there is a dog who is waiting to find you. Be patient, be open. And when she leads you into the darkness, trust her, because she knows the way out." In Cedar Ridge, the mine shaft where Lily was found has been sealed for safety, but the spot is marked with a small memorial. The marker tells the story of the rescue, of the brave stray who led a veteran to save a child, of the bonds that formed in darkness and flourished in light. Every year, on the anniversary of the rescue, people gather at the site to pay their respects. They bring flowers and dog treats, photos of their own rescue dogs, and letters of gratitude for the healing they found. They tell their stories to one another, finding community in shared experience, finding hope in each other's journeys. And sometimes, if you visit the site at just the right time, when the morning mist is thick and the autumn sun is just beginning to rise, they say you can hear something in the silence. Not the wind in the trees or the birds singing their morning songs, something else entirely. They say you can hear a dog barking, far off in the forest, leading someone lost toward home. This is the legacy of Gold and Marcus, of Lily and Scout, of Emma and Hope, and all the dogs and humans whose lives were touched by one stray dog's knowing heart. It is a legacy of love and courage, of sacrifice and redemption, of the bonds that form between species and transform us all. It is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when the weight of our pain seems unbearable and the future seems empty of hope, we are never truly alone. There is always someone out there, human or animal, who sees our suffering and reaches out to help. There is always a path out of darkness, even if we can't see it ourselves. And sometimes, all we have to do is follow the stray dog into the hole. What we find at the bottom just might save our lives.